Greetings, Jeepers. So what we're going to do today is continue working on this Dana 25 axle. We've walked you through the steps of putting on the knuckle and the brake backing plate in previous videos. Now we're going to work on putting on the drum and hub and bearings inside. This is what the finished product looks like. In addition, we got some worn lockers that we'll install. And this is the other side of the Dana 25 axle, and we'll put this together and show you how it's done.
Starting from your right, we're going to install the brake drum onto the front axle. The brake drum already has the studs pressed through the hub, and to install this, we will start with our bearing cup. The bearing cup will be placed and pushed into there. Then we'll have our bearing on top. We will pack this with multi-purpose high temperature bearing grease for both bearings. Put that on top. And then we'll put our grease seal on top of that. And then on the other side, we will install our other cup and bearing. So you're going to install your hub with this assembly in right into your spindle on your axle. And then you're going to put your next cup in, grease and pack your bearing. Then you have to put on your small washer, has this little groove in it. That groove will align with the groove on your spindle. And then we will put on our first nut, torque this to 50 foot-pounds, then back it off 1/6 of a turn of the flat. I'll show you how to do that. Then you put on your bigger washer with this little spike, you could say, pointing inwards. And then you're gonna put on your last nut and torque this one to 50 foot-pounds. And lastly, once you get your brake drum installed onto your axle, there finally will be our lockers installed. This right here will be bolted on with your 2.5-inch long bolt, your 3/8 coarse thread with a lock washer, and then they'll also be shimmed to properly get the amount of free play on the axle when it has the snap ring installed in the small groove on your axle shaft. When you spin your locker over, your locker will split in half. This is where we will fill it up with grease, and we'll also put a gasket in between the two parts to seal up your locker. The first step is you have to make sure to pack your bearings with some multi-purpose bearing grease. The trick is you get some grease on your palm and we'll just smash it like this, metal force grease into your bearings. You want to do this until grease starts coming out the other side. And you can see grease is starting to come out the other side, and do that all the way around. Once you got your two bearings packed with grease, now we will grease up the bearing cup on a small film of grease on the inside and the outside, and we'll drop our bearing cup into the hub, just pushing it in. Should just drop into the seat all the way to the bottom. Next, we have to install our first bearing. Put the tapered side facing downwards. It'll just push in like that, get nice and square. I would take off your greasy gloves and just use clean hands because you won't get grease everywhere. Make sure we install our oil seal face this direction. So you want this lip facing downwards and your metal plate facing upwards, and we'll just push it in. We'll seat it into our hub, pushing it all the way in until it's square, and it'll seat all the way down. Apply a light coat of grease on your spindle. Make sure you don't get any grease on your brake pads, or just apply a thin coat all the way around. Now pick up your brake drum facing this direction. Make sure you don't get your greasy hands inside your drum, and now we'll just push it on this way, making sure nothing falls apart. Just push it onto our spindle. Now grease your second bearing cup, nice thin coat of grease on the inside. Push your brake drum so you kind of get your spindle centered. And now we put in our first bearing cup right into the hub. Continue to push your cup all the way until it seats all the way in the back. And it'll push back so far and it'll stop. They know it's set right. And now we'll put in our bearing. With your bearing full of grease, we'll just push it on to the spindle next until it pushes all the way back into your cup. Next, you install your first washer. This is your smaller washer. This little groove right here will fit in the groove of your spindle right here. And we'll just push it on. Now install your first nut onto the threads on your spindle. This might be kind of tricky to start, but we'll eventually get it. Now take your special socket that fits these large nuts on your front axle. Continue to thread your large nut all the way on until it seats all the way into your bearings. Use a ratchet just to get your nut pushed in deeper before we torque it. Now get a large torque wrench and we'll now torque it to 50 foot-pounds. Once you get your first nut torqued to 50 foot-pounds, we have to now back this nut up 1/6 of a turn. This will set the right preload on the bearings. And how to do this is make a mark on your hub, as I have right here, and that's in line with the point on our nut. Then we'll have to back it up so the point over here is now in line with this mark. I've started to back off this nut. As you can see, this point is now over here, while the flat is now in line with the mark. We have to get this next point to this mark. The nut has now been backed off. As you can see, we have this point in line with the mark, and now we know that this nut is properly set. The next step is to install your second washer. This washer will be installed on top of this first nut. We will want it so that this larger tab will be facing inwards, and we'll put this tab into the slot on the spindle. So we'll just spin it around and put it on. Once you get the washer on, push the washer all the way back until it seats right against your other nut. The last step is to install your last large nut, and this nut will be threaded right onto your spindle as well. Thread the nut onto the spindle and we'll thread it all the way back until it hits the other washer. Now use your socket so you can thread it all the way back. Finally, torque your last nut to 50 foot-pounds with your large torque wrench. And there we go. We have all the nuts properly torqued. This is very important. We get all of our nuts torqued to the right spec. The final nut does not have to be backed off. Just torque it to 50 foot-pounds and it is good. One critical step, you have to make sure we bend our second washer down flat against the first nut you can see, so that will prevent your nut from backing off. Just stick a screwdriver in there or a flat bar and we'll just bend the washer flat against their nut. If a flathead screwdriver does not work, just use a small crowbar and we'll pry it up. As you can see, the washer is now bent flat against the nut.
That's it. Subscribe.